Alright, let's discuss that Raceroom patch that came out, or is coming out, I should say. They just had a dev stream on Thursday, which by the time this video goes out should be yesterday. They had a very good dev stream. They haven't had one in a few months, so it was really nice to see Raceroom come out and talk about all of the work that they've been doing, and some of the changes that we'll be seeing in this patch. Before I get too far in, what you'll be seeing in the background is just an online race I did in the 1992 DTM cars. Just something to look at while we talk about Raceroom. So, to start off, we'll talk about just some things that were in the patch. They started off talking about the sounds. One of the neat things was improving the backfire noises, basically giving the cars more backfire options, more variety in the way that they backfire, and making the backfires more realistic. All of that was really good. The sounds were great. It's going to be a neat change. You won't really notice outright until somebody new comes along and goes, hey, that sounds really neat when the car backfires. But for somebody that's playing all the time, not going to be something you necessarily notice unless you're looking for it. The next thing, sound-wise, they improved the rev limiter noises. This was a really neat change. They showed it off, and it sounds much more real. Instead of sounding like a game rev limiter, it now sounds like a real rev limiter, which is what they were going for. It sounds like what you hear at the starting grid at almost every single racing series. So that was another good change. As we all know, sound changes in Raceroom are always welcome, as they always make your ears happy. Moving on from sound, one of the other giant changes is the front end UI is getting a big overhaul. So currently in Raceroom, when you first load up, you're greeted with that big green orb, as they call it, and then some things along the sides. Now, unfortunately, that's not a very pretty interface, and it's not a very intuitive interface, because you have a bunch of options on the right-hand side. For new players, it doesn't make much sense. So they're basically scrapping that entire front interface, and instead, in the current interface, once you click on Raceroom Racing Experience, and you have that white, red, and black screen with the images behind it, that's the screen that you will now see from the start. And instead of having your experience options on the right-hand side, the experience options are now at a sort of slide-out menu that you can access from the very top of the screen. And on top of that, the experiences now can be switched to basically on the fly from that menu. So instead of having to back out and load up another experience, you just hop in another experience. It changes the flavor of that menu, so to speak, and you're in that experience already. All of that looked really, really smooth. Obviously, we'll have to wait to see when we get our hands on it how smooth it is, but it looked like they spent quite a bit of time trying to improve how smooth that was, how actionable it was, and how nice it was in terms of getting the user into a meaningful menu quickly and getting them through meaningful choices quickly. All of those very good changes. Along with that, they talked about some improved loading times that they had. It's hard to tell. I never really count the number of seconds that I'm loading for, but they showed one load being as low as 10 seconds. That feels like a perfectly acceptable time for a sim racing game. It's a hard thing to tell because I don't count my current loading times. Along with some of the fixes, shadow fixes and optimizations, they didn't really show anything for this, but it was just something they mentioned. That is one thing on my personal system. That's one thing I've had to adjust up and down quite often, is the shadow values. So hopefully that will let me keep my shadow values really high for the future, which will be nice. They also mentioned, quote unquote, various art and bug fixes. This will be something that we can delve more into when we actually have the raw patch in our hands and we have the full patch notes. But it's something that at this point is a little tricky to key in on. It should be quite a lot. I mean, the entire patch itself is over 10 gigabytes big, so there should be quite a lot of stuff, although there is some content in there also, which we'll get to in a minute. Excuse me. Suspension updates are coming. Not so much physical suspension updates, but more sound suspension updates, and this gets into some of the sound stuff also. They mentioned and showed off a lot of the new sound options. So currently you have a not insignificant amount of sound options, but you are getting a lot more things like body rattle at speed, suspension creaking when you're going over different surfaces, improved road noise, and basically you're getting sliders, well not sliders, but options in the options menu to actually change some of the values for a lot of these things. So it seems like not only are they improving the sounds, but they're also improving your ability to dictate how much or how little of those sounds you hear. All of that is very good. A big update that will make a lot of single-player racers happy is the AI update. And it also makes me happy because it's fun every once in a while to just roll around with the AI, whether you're practicing or doing an actual session or even doing a single-player campaign. Sometimes you just want to run around by yourself and not deal with other people. They dub it the quote-unquote smooth operator fix. I think that's kind of a clever, fun little name. One of the main things that they keyed on when they were talking about it is smoother braking. So currently when you race against AI, you'll see the AI flutter the brakes quite a lot in various different circumstances where they're just on and off the brakes very, very quickly in succession, and you just see the brake lights flicker on and off. That's pretty much gone. They did show off a quick video of it in the World Touring cars. It was tough to tell. They were having issues with Twitch, where the video was freezing quite a bit. However, when it was moving at the correct speed, the AI did look like it wasn't quite as aggressive. It looked like it was avoiding better, and it was braking in a more smooth manner, which means it's a more predictable manner, which means it's easier to know where the AI is going and where you need to put your car in accordance to that. Again, it's something that will be easier to tell once you get your hands on it, but it looked good from the outset. The next big change was some refactoring of the backend code and systems. It wasn't a full-blown refactoring, but it was more so sort of trying to get the system more accepting of a large influx of users, and at the same time more accepting of higher initial pings. So what that means is, effectively, on days when they would release content, their store would pretty much die. It would just be full of timeouts, you can't access this, etc., etc., etc. Just lots of issues. However, there were also situations a lot of people came into where when they first initially connected to a server, they might be given a timeout error message just because their initial ping connection was so bad because they were so far from that server. And effectively, they tried to almost completely eliminate those. Again, when this patch comes through, it'll be an excellent time for them to fully test that and see how well they have done on that. Another neat change, again, this patch is very large. Another neat change was adding false starts. So basically, as long as you're on get real mode with the flags and rules on, then you can actually false start the car. So no more times of just putting it in first, holding the rev range where you want it, and just going for it. Effectively, if you're in get real mode and you have the flags on, it's up to you to do what you need to get the car started appropriately. They did not mention what the penalty was. My assumption will be it is a drive-through. That is what makes the most sense. It might be a DQ, though. Another couple things they mentioned that didn't make as much sense to me because I don't use some of these features, The clutch bite point being an option. Again, I don't actually use a clutch. I just use my paddle shifters, and I don't bother using the clutch pedal at all with that. So that's not something that directly affects me. For H-pattern users, I'm sure that's something they will actually probably enjoy quite a bit, of being able to actually set when their clutch engages. Another thing with that is being able to set upper dead zones for the clutch and brake pedal. Again, I don't mess with my dead zones very much, so an upper dead zone for a brake pedal doesn't mean much to me. But for people who really like to tweak those settings, probably a good change. Along those lines, they're also implementing an option to prevent double shifting on older or worn out wheels. This should be a great option for a lot of people. I sometimes got this every once in a while, even with my new G27. I say new, it's almost half a year old at this point, but it's still new to me. So that's going to be a great option for a lot of people who have more worn out sensors for their shifters. They did mention there were quite a few extra things in there that they weren't able to cover specifically in their allotted time. So it'd be interesting to see what other stuff is in there, but these are the most major things. And, of course, dedicated servers. But we will go over those in more detail in just a moment. Now, there are some things that are going to be in the patch, but are not going to be available for purchase right away. Those things include the World Touring Car Championship 2014 cars, which they've stated will be a car pack, not an experience. That will be included in the patch, along with Macau, the track, and Shanghai, the track, but all three of those things will not be purchasable right away. Those things will be purchasable at a later date, but the files will all be on your computer all ready to go. Now, that can sound sort of annoying, but realistically what this means is they're waiting for the Touring Car Championship sponsors and partners to say, hey, okay, we're ready to go, you're ready to go, let's release this. And one of the nice things about this is, yes, the files on your computer and will be on your computer in the game, and you won't be able to access them. That will be frustrating. However, it means when they get the go-ahead from the WTCC, they will be able to just immediately go, boom, open it in the store. They won't have to do a patch for it. They won't have to do anything special. They can just open up the sale for it, which will be nice. So, kind of an annoyance, kind of a nice thing. The other part of that package is the DTM 2015 cars, which they mentioned specifically they are rolling out competitions for first, a couple different competitions that they want to have. And they also mentioned that the physics are not final. The physics are not ready. So what will be on your computer are just the models and textures. They will not have the physics for them yet. But they are getting a complete physics overhaul, taking mostly into account the other DTM drivers' feedback. So, now on to the meat and potatoes of what we're getting, which is the dedicated servers. You will be able to access them free on Steam through tools. If you're not familiar with that, if you're on your Steam library, you just go to, you either hover over where it says games and click there once you're in your library, or you just hover over where it says library and select it from there, and you just select the tools interface. And along that list, you will see the Raceroom Racing Experience dedicated server. You basically just install that, run it. One of the nicest things is the dedicated server actually has an interface. This may seem like a simple thing, but if you've dealt with Stock Car Extreme, Assetto Corsa, any of those other titles, if you've dealt with the dedicated servers for those, you understand how important it is to have an interface to make it so much more user-friendly, make it easier for people to utilize, just make it easier for people to do what they want to do with those servers. Now, some of the functionality that we saw and that they talked about, multi-class will be functional, but not officially supported. What this means is you can do multi-class events, you can add more than one type of car, but the race results will not be split. So the race results will just be overall results. It will not give you class splits for that. But you can still do your multi-class events. You will need to open ports for actual smooth operation of the functionality. So what this effectively means is to get the best operation out of it, the most people connected correctly, you'll have to open the correct ports. Not an issue for most people. Might be a slight issue for some people who aren't as tech savvy. However, they've already said on their forums and other places they will put very easy to follow steps on how to open those different ports. One of my biggest things, fuel usage and tire wear multipliers. So where you can effectively say, I want tire wear to happen at 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 times the normal rate. They didn't show off the range of it, but those two options are in there from the start. Also, mandatory pit stops, which is great. And another interesting option I saw that they didn't talk about was wrecker prevention, which is an option it showed either as on or off. It's a very interestingly named option. So it's going to be intriguing to see what that ends up being. One of the coolest things they mentioned is that they, alongside this, they are also opening up and discussing the API that they're using for it. Now, what this should allow is sites such as your race departments or your other sim racing leagues. It should allow people within those environments to write just a couple quick different things and apps that can easily connect with the data that that dedicated server holds and the dedicated server and the data that that server is creating. So effectively, it'll make easier tracking for your leagues. It'll make easier tracking for the different classes within your leagues. So even though multi-class isn't officially supported, but it's functional, do what you need to do. So it should allow for a lot of very cool options. Now, they did obviously say it's still technically an alpha. Makes sense. The whole multiplayer is still technically an alpha. So, what that also means is that they'll likely work on the dedicated servers at the same time as they're working on multiplayer, and big overhauls and big changes will come through. Not super frequently, but you will want to expect those kind of things. So that was obviously the biggest change that is coming down the pipe. Now, they also talked about some of the future things, whether they be things they'd mentioned before or things they hadn't mentioned before. One of the big things everybody wanted to know about is the transmission model. They had showed that off before, and a lot of us really wanted to know how that was coming along, what the progress was. Progress seemed to be coming along nicely. They showed another video with the new sound model in there. Upshifts sound mostly the same. That's expected. Downshifts sounded a lot better. Before, there was a little too much bouncing, and I think they were doing that mostly just to show off what they were doing. Now they've gotten data directly from the Touring Car Championship and a couple support championships, specifically from one of the Chevy teams. They've gotten direct data from them about how the transmission functions during a session. So it sounded a lot. It didn't sound smoother, but it sounded more real, which is very, very good. Another future content piece was the Audi TT Cup car, which looked very neat. It's effectively just an Audi TT car that you would buy, but in a GT format. It is obviously not ready. All they have is the model and texture, the base model and the base texture done. It doesn't have any physics, doesn't have any sound, but it did look very intriguing, and judging by how quickly they get the actual car assets done, it's probably not as far off as you would think. The Audi R18, which is the prototype car, looked about the same as it was forward before. They didn't really show anything new about it. They just had it in the teaser. But they mentioned, along with the R18, that the prototype category as a whole is going to have a very big overhaul in the future. What this means is not only will we get more cars, but they're hoping to shift different cars and form their own P1 and P2 categories. Whether that means all Le Mans cars, whether that means different categories such as the DPs being included with the P2s as they are in like the Tudor series. We don't know yet. All we know is that they plan on a big overhaul for prototypes, which is really good news, especially with multi-class racing, because prototypes and GT cars go together like peanut butter and jelly, and they make some really fun traffic. Another very cool announcement was the open wheel cars. A lot of people have been asking them for a long time about open wheelers. They haven't said anything before. They finally showed, not only did they talk about it, they finally showed an initial composite of a GP2 car. I call it a composite because it wasn't a textured model. It was just a model within a rendering suite. So I guess a render would be a better name for it, but it did look like a fairly complete model of a GP2 style car. They talked about they already have plans on a junior style Formula car similar to a Formula Ford, which is, if you're familiar with Project Cars, effectively the Formula rookie car, and that is a Formula Ford. And they also talked about major formulas up to and possibly including Formula One. So that is fantastic news. Open wheel cars offer a completely different feeling of racing, and you have to race between each other very differently. So that's a very neat and awesome thing. For a couple of the circuits, obviously Macau and Shanghai are going to be in the patch, but released at a later date. So those are both there. They showed their progress on Spa, which looks fantastic. It looks like they are taking great pride and care with how they release Spa, which makes sense. It's a track that a lot of people love. It's a track a lot of people care about. And actually, a couple of their developers live very close to Spa. So it's a very interesting thing, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. Another thing, they didn't mention this in the patch notes, but I'm squeezing it in here because it's a personal favorite of mine. Circuit Paul Ricard, I asked JF about on Twitter, and he said it's basically done. The same individual who's working on Spa is also working on Paul Ricard. The models are done, the texture's done, everything is done with it. Basically, it's just waiting for AI, which means AI pathing, AI, different AI routes, so to speak, and then also testing that comes with that. So that circuit should not be that far off either, which is great. So that's all of the content that's coming in this patch, the dedicated servers, and the future content. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. That's basically the bulk of everything. Now, a couple specific concerns that I have going forward. Again, everything is never perfect. There's always things that can be improved. You always have to criticize to make the thing better. One of the concerns, quite a few times they mentioned waiting on partners or sponsors. Now, it's a good thing when you have partners and sponsors. It's a great thing because you get, as they said, you get access to people like Tom Coronel, who is a current World Touring Car Championship driver. You get time from those individuals. The DTM drivers, you get time from all of those people, whether they're in the middle of their series or not. You get access to all of those people easily and quickly, and you get to use their actual names with your product and association with your product. And you get to use the actual cars, the actual series, the actual tracks. All of that stuff is great. However, multiple times they mentioned they were waiting on these people, and that's what concerns me. Because a lot of times, those racing championships are worried a lot more about their bottom lines than they are about the health and well-being of their product. Now, that may sound counterintuitive, and it's one of those capitalistic ideas that's very annoying. No need to get into it here. Effectively, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it is a concern going forward, because a lot of times you can spend a lot of time making content that may never see the light of day because suddenly somebody decides this isn't the right place for our product anymore. We don't want you to release this. I don't think that's going to happen. I am not saying that's going to happen. It's just a possibility. The other annoyance with it is a lot of times they will want to release at certain times, whether that be a peak time in the championship, a down time in the championship, when the championship isn't on, when it is on. So a lot of times content can be done but not able to be released because you're waiting on a time that works for both yourself and your partner or sponsor. Again, not the worst thing in the world, but a little annoyance, a little niggle here or there. Other than that, there really wasn't much else to say. I mean, almost everything they showed looked great or sounded great or was great. Nothing stuck out as, oh, that's a poor choice or, oh, that's a poor change. Everything pretty much was like, yeah, this is all stuff that needed to be done or we already knew about or already was in the pipeline, things of that nature. So it's, except the open wheel cars, those were a pretty big surprise for most of us, I think. But all around, I feel like it's going to be a great patch, and it's going to be quite a bit of fun to run a server. I can't wait to have some really interesting and fun combinations, and being able to actually run league events is going to be quite fun. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Obviously it was very long. I apologize for that, but it is what it is. So I have a feeling there's going to be some race room content coming down the pipe through YouTube before too long. So we shall see. But as is always the case, I would thank you guys for being here, and I will catch you guys later.